and welcome to the weekend worship service of the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. I'm the Reverend Monica Dobbins. I'm the assistant minister of this congregation, and it is my joy to welcome you here today. If you're new to our congregation or visiting us for the first time, I'd like to say a special thank you to you for checking us out. You can learn more about our church by visiting our website, slcuu.org, or our social media channels. Our church remains closed, but our congregation is as busy and lively as ever, and we would love for you to be a part of it. Before we begin our worship time together, I'd like to make a couple of announcements. First, this year, as always, we'll be making a gift to our sibling church, San Esteban, to help make their holidays brighter. However, due to some changes that have taken place at San Esteban, instead of doing a Thanksgiving collection and a giving tree, we will be doing just the one collection and presenting our entire gift at one time. So no need to buy toys and gifts this year. You can just make one financial contribution. You can do this via check sent to the church with San Esteban on the memo line, or you can use our website or your Givelify phone app to make your gift. No matter how you do it, please make sure that your gifts reach the church office no later than November 19th. And thank you in advance for your generosity. Second, a few weeks ago, I presented a sermon to you on the topic of the proposed eighth principle of Unitarian Universalism. There seems to be a lot of enthusiasm about this idea, but people also have a lot of questions about it. So, as promised, there will be 2 study sessions coming up in November. All members of our congregation are invited to attend the first study session at 7:00 p.m. on November 10th. And then there will be a special study session exclusively for people of color on November 17th. You can find the Zoom information in our weekly Torch email. And if you're not able to attend a study session this month, not to worry, there will be another opportunity in the spring. And finally, if you can believe it, we are already getting geared up for the holidays. Lessons and carols, the hilarious holiday pageant, and the solstice celebration. That's right, no pandemic can stop the baby Jesus from coming, and likewise, no pandemic can stop the earth from reaching its farthest point from the sun. Now, I don't know about you, but I could use a little holiday merriment this year, even if it's over Zoom. So we are looking for storytellers of all ages to help us out with the annual solstice celebration, which will be held on Monday, December 21st. If you have a good winter or solstice story that you'd like to share, please fill out the brief form in your Torch email, and Amanda, Esko, and I will get in touch with you very soon. And now, as always, we begin our worship service with the lighting of the chalice. Symbol of light and of knowledge, symbol of warmth and of freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love.
This week has been a lot. This year has been too much. Between the pandemic and the election, daylight savings even, our world is under immense pressure. It's this stress that leads us to look for places of connection, support, community. It's what leads us to church. Even in this time of physical distance, we have families meeting over Zoom for Halloween parties, meditation, small group ministry, auction events. Our community is reaching for each other any way we can. We have built a community based on shared values and a yearning for social justice. As we move into the next few weeks, possibly with a lot of uncertainty, let's keep virtually moving towards each other and our community for support. As I was preparing for this week's worship, I found this responsive reading that brought this idea home for me. It's entitled, "We Need a Religion," and it's written by Scott Alexander. In a world with so much hatred and violence, we need a religion that proclaims the inherent worth and dignity of every person. In a world with so much brutality and fear, we need a religion that seeks justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. In a world with so many persons abused and neglected, we need a religion that calls us to accept one another and encourage one another to spiritual growth. In a world with so much dogmatism and falsehood, we need a religion that challenges us to be free and responsible in our search for truth and meaning. In a world with so much tyranny and oppression, we need a religion that affirms the right and conscience and the use of democratic process in our society. In a world with so much inequity and strife, we need a religion that strives toward a goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. In a world with so much environmental degradation, we need a religion that advocates for respect for the environment and our interdependent web of all existence to which we are a part of. In a world with so much uncertainty and despair, we need a religion that teaches our hearts to hope and our hands to care. As we go through the coming weeks, when things are stressful, let's point towards our faith which tells us to move with love, support those that need our help, and that we all matter in this great web of existence. May it be so.
Warm greetings to all of you today. Reverend Monica and I are going to share the meditation today, and it's an important meditation for a couple of reasons. The first is that the words are very beautiful and meaningful, especially for our times today, but it's also a reminder that there were hard times in the past that America has had to face. The writer of this particular meditation was A. Powell Davies. He was the Unitarian minister of All Souls Church in Washington, D.C. He served there during the 40s and 50s. This was a difficult period in American history when the House of Un-American Activities just seemed to dominate, and everyone was deeply concerned about where democracy was going. And so, although the circumstances are a little bit different from today, it's a reminder that democracy doesn't always run as smoothly as we like. So A. Powell Davies shared these words roughly 60 years or 70 years ago. The years of all of us are short, our lives precarious.
Our days and nights go hurrying on, and there is scarcely time to do the little that we might.
And yet we find time for bitterness, for petty treason, and evasion.
What can we do to stretch our hearts enough to lose their littleness?
Here we are, all of us, all upon this planet, bound together in a common destiny.
Living our lives between the briefness of the daylight and the dark.
Kindred in this, each lighted by the same precarious, flickering flame of life. How does it happen that we are not kindred in all things else?
How strange and foolish are these walls of separation that divide us. Well, here we are. It's nearly election day. We've waited so long for this moment, only to realize that it isn't a moment at all. Election day is stretched out into election week, maybe even election month. Like the pandemic, the election does not have a clear ending point, and it's possible that we won't have answers about our new elected officials until December. Now, many of you, I imagine, have already voted, and so there's little to do now but wait. There's no sense in preaching to you about the importance of voting or the value of our fifth principle. You already know. You've done your civic duty and then some, because I know many of you have also been involved in get out the vote efforts and campaigns as well. No matter what happens, this election, as it slowly spools out into history, I want you to know that your efforts have not been wasted. This work was vital, and I applaud you for it. And I thank you for it. So that's all I have to say about the election today. After all, if it can be said about the election, then you've probably already heard it in the past few weeks. What really remains to be said? Instead, I want to zoom out to a wider frame. I want to talk about patriotism, what it means to be a citizen, what it means to live in this society, what it means to love this country. You know, patriotism is something about which I feel, if not cynical, then at least skeptical. After all, as a Unitarian Universalist, I embrace our sixth principle, the goal of world community for all people. As a Christian, I believe that all human beings are children of God, regardless of ethnicity or national origin. And as an advocate for immigrants, I believe that borders have their uses, but must never be walls between nations. I'm much more comfortable being a citizen of the world than I sometimes am being a citizen of the United States. And yet, I am a patriot too. That's a deeply uncomfortable word, related in etymology and in spirit to patriarchy. Yet, I don't know of another word I can use to describe my bone-deep connection to the land on which I was born, and my connection to other people who were either born on this land or chose to live here. This connection does not diminish the connection I feel toward all other humans, but there is a special relationship to those who were brought up on the same stories and in the same culture, who ostensibly have the same dreams and desires as I do. In spite of everything, I still think that the idea of American democracy is a good one. To paraphrase Winston Churchill, it is the worst form of government, with the exception of all those other forms which have been tried from time to time. And I refuse to settle for anything less than the full blossom of freedom blooming in the garden of common destiny, rooted in equality and watered by our mutual responsibility to one another. Like many of you, I've been watching a lot more Netflix during this period of social isolation. Recently, I've watched 2 movies that couldn't seem more different from one another, yet shared an actor in common and also shared that actor's ethos. The first was the newest iteration of Sacha Baron Cohen's character Borat, in which the actor re-inhabits his cheerful but bigoted Kazakh journalist character and returns to America with the intention of delivering a mysterious and salacious gift to a high-ranking Trump official. Now, if you saw the first film 14 years ago, then you already know what to expect. Lots of raunchy and extremely uncomfortable jokes that seem to come at the expense of minorities, but in reality put bigots themselves under the microscope. Baron Cohen has been criticized for developing characters that play upon the most egregious stereotypes of minorities, especially of Jews. But the actor is Jewish himself and says, "The truth is, I've been passionate about challenging bigotry and intolerance throughout my life. As a comedian, I have tried to use my characters to get people to let their guard down and reveal what they actually believe, including their prejudice." The second movie is the new Aaron Sorkin courtroom drama, The Trial of the Chicago 7, in which Baron Cohen plays the part of yippie and professional loudmouth and my longtime hero, Abbie Hoffman. Hoffman, along with the other members of the Chicago 7, were accused of conspiring to incite a riot at the Democratic National Convention in 1968. Hoffman had a reputation for a casual relationship to the law, a piercing contempt for authority, and a flair for the dramatic that bordered on the ridiculous. Yet I can think of few Americans more patriotic than he and his co-defendants. Abbie Hoffman recognized that there was a powerful connection between the Vietnam War and the police state in American cities. He recognized that personal sovereignty as a response to the police state, started with being in total possession of oneself. Defying authority on principle is an immature form of patriotism and will only get you so far. The mature patriot understands the uses of all kinds of power and refuses those forms which oppress and destroy. Hoffman and Borat might seem to have little in common other than the famous person who inhabits their characters. But here's what they share. Their power is in refusing to accept the bonds of illegitimate authority. These two figures, one fictional and one realer than real life, test the elasticity of liberty, stretching it to its breaking point, the point at which tyranny enforces its brittle effects. Jesters and prophets endure criticism and ridicule in every age, but the wisest rulers understand their role to make room for the sacred voice of dissidence that saves the nation from the errors of hubris and the disasters of tyranny. Baron Cohen has argued, along with social scientists like Karl Popper and historians like Hannah Arendt, that tyranny and fascism do not require the fervor of the masses to operate. Indifference is a sufficient habitat, especially the indifference that results from the comforts afforded by privilege. It need not be a passive indifference. The hand-wringing of wondering what on earth one could possibly do to make a difference is a kind of active indifference that has the same effect. Even though the election is out of our hands, we are still vulnerable. Vulnerable to indifference, to cynicism, to misinformation, to overwhelm and fear. Fascism is a real threat in our nation, and it preys upon these vulnerabilities. At the heart of fascism, as historian Heather Cox Richardson has described it, is the idea of a strong nation whose people are welded into a unit by militarism abroad and by the suppression of opposition at home. Fascists believe that some people are better than others, and that those elites should direct all aspects of society. Well, the good news is that it is always possible to resist fascism and the conditions in which fascism thrives. We resist indifference with rebellion, starting with an internal rebellion that roots out internalized oppression in our own minds, taking seriously the Third Amendment to the Constitution by refusing to allow the state to occupy rooms in our heads. We resist cynicism by refusing to believe the worst about people and instead treating all people with kindness and dignity. We resist bigotry by courageously speaking out when we hear it, even if it makes our voices shake. We resist information by investing in trustworthy institutions, and we resist fear by embracing love that extends beyond borders. It can't hurt to have a sense of humor, too. As long as we're laughing, we're still in control of our minds and thoughts, and that is a powerful defense against fascism. Sacha Baron Cohen says, "Today around the world, demagogues appeal to our worst instincts. Conspiracy theories, once confined to the fringe, are going mainstream. It's as if the age of reason, the era of evidential argument is ending, and our knowledge is increasingly delegitimized, and scientific consensus is dismissed. Democracy, which depends on shared truths, is in retreat, and autocracy, which depends on shared lies, is on the march. In the end, it all comes down to what kind of world we want. If we prioritize truth over lies, empathy over indifference, and expertise over ignorance, then maybe, just maybe, we can save democracy. We can still have a place for free speech and free expression, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our commitments to democracy, to the idea of democracy, does not hinge on a single election. It never has and it never will. Elections are when we get to choose our adversaries for the next few years of fighting for justice. Hopefully, our nation is choosing worthy adversaries this time around. But no matter who occupies the White House, no matter who occupies the congressional chambers or the benches of the Supreme Court, we have a patriotic duty to make sure no one occupies our minds. That is a freedom that no one can take from us. May it be so.
We're just a few days away from the 2020 presidential election, and I think I know how we're all feeling right about now. It doesn't matter if you really identify yourself as a Democrat or a Republican. Well, that is a Republican before 2016. You know, we're all feeling it, aren't we? We're all feeling it, whether we be progressive or conservative. Well, that is a conservative before fake news, white nationalism, and QAnon. Well, it's all pervasive, these feelings, whether you're a Unitarian or Episcopalian or Jewish or Muslim. As long as you know how to hold a Bible right side up, and you're really not afraid of touching the Quran. Now, I need to confess, this election has me thinking a lot about becoming a theist. I'm ready to strike a deal with any deity for a good outcome on Tuesday. You know, as they say, there are no atheists in foxholes, and oh, are we in a foxhole right now. We're in a real dogfight to preserve the tenuous threads which hold our democracy together. I think we all have some plain old-fashioned jitters. I sure do. You know, it kind of feels like we're watching this old jalopy back in the era of silent movies, and the jalopy stops right at the precipice of a really high cliff, half of it dangling over the edge, and the other half sort of on firm ground. And we sit there in the audience, we wonder, okay, which way is it going to go? What's going to happen next? As the wind begins to stir up and the car teeters on this edge, back and forth, back and forth. And so here we are in this movie house, and we, the audience, we're anxiously watching the fate of this car. It's either going to be rescued or it's going to plunge into a deep ravine which will bring certain ruin. And so we hope and pray that someone, some hero will come galloping in, pull the car back from the dangerous high cliffs, and all will be fine once again. We have jitters as we watch this car teetering on the edge. As far as our nation's democracy goes, well, perhaps we better stop watching, and we need then to pull it back from the disaster ourselves. Got to get up out of our seats and pull that democracy back to where it is safe. I have learned a lot about democracy, especially these past 4 years. You know, like so many things, we don't realize it's missing until we notice we don't have it anymore. Perhaps many of us, and I most certainly include myself, have grown lazy and failed to tend the business of keeping democracy alive. Our thinking may well have been that democracy was simply inherent in the institutions. You know, we have all the trappings of democracy, and so therefore we must be living in a democracy. I believe, for example, that we were a democracy simply because we had a constitution. We have elected officials. We have a judicial system, all providing checks and balances that would permit the engine of democracy to run unimpaired forever. You know, it's all any of us have ever known heretofore, but these institutions do not define democracy. They're merely instruments by which democracy is realized. The mechanisms of democracy can be abused more easily than we ever thought possible, as it is capable of disenfranchising minorities, politicizing the state, stigmatizing immigrants, diminishing civil liberties, and building this exclusionary us for those who regard individual liberty as supreme. Now, a democracy, in the true sense of the word, must preclude my interests, my wealth, my fortunes alone at the expense of others. Democracy was created for the commonwealth, for the commonweal, for the common good, for all of us. In fact, it was James Madison who was particularly astute in recognizing the tension between individual liberty and democracy. Democracy with liberty and justice for all. He made it clear that it was insufficient to simply guard against a tyrannical and oppressive monarch. The people as well, he noted, can be oppressive. Where in Madison's words, we must guard part of society against the oppression of the other part. Madison's own words. We've got to guard part of society against the oppression of the other part. So translating that into today's situation, it's as though James Madison was saying, it's not only Trump that's the problem in a democratic society, but it's his base as well. We must guard part of society against oppression of the other part. We must guard against the white nationalists, the militias, the evangelical right, all of whom will trample the liberties and rights of minorities. Now, if Madison were with us today, he would quickly argue that we need to do the work that democracy calls for. We need to work to ensure that black lives do matter, that the GLBTQ community can love whom they want, that women do have reproductive rights, that immigrants must be treated humanely, that health care is a human right that must be afforded to all people, everyone, in a democracy. The institutions by themselves will not support a democracy. Oppression is always a threat, everywhere. The methods of limiting the freedom of those who call for the democratic inclusion of all people, the method of oppressing these people who want to apply the equality of democracy as widely as possible, this oppression is essentially run by one playbook. And this playbook is used in Nazi Germany, Putin's Russia, Poland, Hungary, Brazil, and I'm afraid now the United States. Here's the proven formula. The federal and state judiciary lose their autonomy. The intelligence and law enforcement agencies are linked to an imaginary deep state. The media is attacked as the enemy of the people. Science and reason and critical thinking are suspect as elite enclaves threatening to undermine the authority of the oppressor. So, democracy, we now realize, can fall over the cliff in a heartbeat unless we actively work to keep democracy viable. Or, as Madison pointed out, our work entails guarding a part of society against the oppression of the other part. Now, we've done a poor job of guarding the health and wealth of our nation's minorities as it's being ruthlessly exposed now during the pandemic. The ethics of democracy. It almost sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? Attaching ethics to democracy in a time when the president and attorney general are deliberately undermining public faith in the election process. This sends a chilling message to everyone. Now, as we've seen with child separation on the border, or secret federal police in Portland, democracy, and just the very idea of a civil society, these concepts are quickly eroding. Ethics in Democracy was the name of an essay written by John Dewey 3 years before our church in Salt Lake City was even founded. Now, with that title, suggesting that perhaps democracy is not all that ethical, he obviously discerned some flaws in the democratic system, even back then. And so Dewey felt inspired to revisit the deeper meaning of democracy, and that is kind of investigate its powers and its vulnerabilities. Democracy, he reminded us, was not only a form of government, but it was an ethic, a way of living. Dewey's vision for democracy went beyond the simple notion of majority rule. I mean, that's all you need, and you have yourself a democracy. Instead, democracy meant a moral, even a spiritual commitment to honor, and I quote, honor the infinite and universal possibility that exists inside every person in a democracy. All people, he says, all people can develop their distinctive capacities to the fullest and then use them for the sake of their communities. So in a nutshell, democracy was powerful in the spirit of cooperative freedom that realized the human potential of everyone. But it was a freedom that had to be voluntary. So now we're getting to the ethics of democracy. Democracy means a practice in how you live your life, including voting and demonstrating and speaking and educating. These are the tools that we all need to defend democracy against the ravages of autocracy. These tools of democracy, our work to safeguard democracy, have been virtually dormant for far too many years, as we believe that somehow democratic norms would keep democracy running. Oh, but have we now awakened? The question remains, have we awakened in time? It gives me the jitters. So be it. Well, as we extinguish the chalice, may we be reminded that democracy, well, it has many interpretations. Ask Senator Mike Lee. Ask the 9 justices of the U.S. Supreme Court. Ask our U.S. Attorney General. Ask Bernie Sanders, or Gavin Newsom, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But if we agree that democracy comes down to our values and how we actually live our lives, then ethics plays an enormous role in understanding the true value and meaning and expression of democracy. May we place our faith once again in America, or more importantly, let us place our faith in Americans once again. Amen.